Hi, and welcome to episode 11 of the 21st Century Pharmacist Show. Today is going to be part 3 of a 4-part series called The Truth About Fat. And what this is all about, you can go back and watch parts 1 and 2 if you missed them, and I encourage you to, is the American Heart Association's recommendation to eat more or to use more omega-6 oils and less coconut oil and less butter and less saturated fat so that we can therefore lower LDL is what they tell us. So part 1, I went through what omega-6s were, what omega-3s were, what coconut oil and what MCT or medium chain triglycerides it contains, and what the differences were in those. And then in part 2, I talked about that most of these omega-6 oils that they're recommending, well over 88 to 90-something% of them, are genetically modified, which leads to what we're going to do today in part 3, is that this genetic modification of these plants leads them to be able to spray glyphosate directly on them. So glyphosate is an herbicide that will kill grass and weeds and those kind of things. So what they did was they genetically modified these plants, so these seeds and these plants that are grown, so that they can spray the Roundup directly on the plant, and it doesn't kill the plant, it just kills the weeds. And while that may make things, convenient for the growers, it makes it very unhealthy for the people who eat those things. And I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why we want to avoid these genetically modified things that have been sprayed with glyphosate. So I went over the genetic modification, I went over why we want to avoid those, and now this is a big part of that through the things that are sprayed on. So as we've been doing in the first 2 parts, green we think means we're okay with to eat and to consume, and red probably means that we should avoid as much as possible. So we talked about the differences in the fats and the oils, and just for a quick review, we'll go to the omega-6 oils, which are, I may not list them all, but corn, soybean, canola, cottonseed, really just any vegetable oil. All right? Then the omega-3 we think of wild fish. We think of, the proper fish oil, or we prefer actually krill oil, supplements. We think of grass-fed, grass-finished beef. And we can go further, but that's where we are. And then the MCTs, or medium chain triglyceride fats, are things like, I should have my grass-fed butter here also, sorry. That's the one I shouldn't leave out since they tell us to eat margarine. My MCTs would be my coconut oils, basically those things, okay? So, coconut oil would contain MCTs. These things would contain more, a higher amount of omega-3s. These would contain more omega-6s, and we can add margarine over here. Okay? So, what happens is these, in general, are genetically modified. The ones that I have here in red of the omega-6 oils, they're recommended. We talked about the problems with that. They have changed the DNA of these seeds so that they can then be sprayed. So they are sprayed heavily, typically, with glyphosate. Now, I talked about why they do it, because it allows them to spray it right on the plant. It'll kill the weeds typically, but it won't kill the plant. So we're going to talk about why that's a problem and how it's becoming more and more of a problem as we go. But so that I have enough room, because this could really be a big series in itself as to why this is such an issue. I think I need to get rid of all this. These genetically modified things, oils and plants that are sprayed with this glyphosate, and now I think it's 2,4-D. Those are these herbicides that they put on these plants directly. And so the plant actually contains these herbicides. We can't wash it off. And we can wash off the outside, but it's actually, inbred into the plant. It's hard for us to get it all out. We can't do it. So why is glyphosate a problem? Well, glyphosate is a chelator. May not have spelled that right, but it chelates minerals, and that's how it kills these weeds. The problem is it also chelates the minerals in the plants that are being sprayed. So we'll take, for example, we're not talking about the omega-6 oils for just a second, but let's take, for example, broccoli. If I have a broccoli that is genetically modified and sprayed with glyphosate, or there's glyphosate, let's say it's not even genetically modified broccoli, it's just broccoli that's grown where they sprayed glyphosate. Glyphosate chelates the minerals that would typically be taken up by that broccoli, and so now there's less nutritional value in my broccoli. And that's what's going on with a lot of these plants that we're eating today. We're not getting the same amount of nutrition that we were getting 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So we have to be very careful with that. So it chelates these minerals so that there's not as many in the plants. And it also, because I'm consuming now something that has glyphosate in it, it chelates my minerals, or our minerals, so that there are less minerals available to our body. I have a section on this in my new book, The 21st Century Pharmacist, talking about how this is creating these deficiencies. And so when all that happens, and I chelate these minerals, which many of them are critical for our enzyme systems in our body to work properly, I start to wreak havoc on the way the body works. Remember, just magnesium, the mineral magnesium, has over 350 positive functions in our body, which is why it's one of my foundational 4 supplements. So what does this all mean? And just right to the point, what can this cause? Well, I'm not saying that glyphosate causes all the things I'm going to write here, but I'm going to tell you that there's research done that says it's a contributing factor. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. I'm not saying it's the sole cause of these things, but it is something that we need to look at, and I think there can be a very good case made that it may be a huge contributing factor to most, if not all, of these. So, for one thing, cancers. For another thing, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, ADD, and we'll ADHD, autism, lots of links there. Gut issues. So we'll talk about IBS, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, I'll put UC, dysbiosis, which means that glyphosate actually can kill the good bacteria in my body. And when that happens, of course, I get more bad bacteria, and that's what really leads to a lot of these gut issues, which can lead to more inflammation. And so we get more osteoarthritis. We get more osteopenia and osteoporosis, which means my bones become weaker because the mineral content has been taken and not optimal to what we want. So we start to get all these things, and this is just, I mean, I can keep going until we're, tired of watching. ALS or Lou Gehrig's syndrome, MS or multiple sclerosis. I mean, and these things just keep going. So this glyphosate has gone up 50-fold. The amount that they allow sprayed on corn has gone up 50 times since, I believe, 1974 or so, when glyphosate was first introduced. And then in 1996 is when our genetically modifieds were introduced. And now we can have 50 times more sprayed on these things than they originally said was safe. And so we're all getting this. No matter, I mean, I eat organic 100% of the time when I can. Everything we eat at home is organic. Now, obviously, when I'm out, I'm not always getting organic. But I eat as much as organic as humanly possible. But still, we're all getting some glyphosate. There's no way to avoid it all. What we want to do is minimize it, and what we want to do is give the body what it needs nutritionally through our water, through our food, through our supplements, through our rest, through our exercise, to be able to get rid of as much as possible. This is very hard to get rid of. It's very tough for the body. It's very tough for the soil to get rid of. So all these issues can be linked to this glyphosate use. And now what's happened, and the reason I wrote this up here, is this 2,4-D is actually a chemical that is another herbicide that, because the plants are pretty smart, those weeds and grasses are pretty smart, they have started to be able to be resistant to the glyphosate, so they can spray glyphosate, but it won't kill all the weeds. And they say that today over 50% of the farmland has weeds that are resistant to this glyphosate. So what do? They say, hey, let's add another chemical called 2,4-D, and now we have a combination that they spray directly on the things that they tell us to eat. Glyphosate and 2,4-D now sprayed directly on these things. And 2,4-D at one time was actually outlawed in Canada. They took it off the market because of all the health issues. Now it's back available there, but I just wanted you to know it has some correlation to chemicals we don't want to be involved with. Let's say that. I better leave it there for today. So we get all this stuff going on, and all these things can be directly tied to glyphosate and 2,4-D, but specifically glyphosate is what I'm talking about today, chelating our minerals so that our mineral content goes down. That's one of the reasons that one of the 4 foundational products is a multivitamin and mineral that gives us some of these things back. And then the reason that a second one is magnesium, because that is one of the most important minerals we can have. And the reason that my multi contains minerals that we may not typically see in some other multis out there. So we based it all on research, of course. And then, because of this, is why the other 2 products of the foundational 4 are probiotics and a digestive enzyme. Because these actually kill the good bacteria in my gut, which leads to my inability to have the right good beneficial bacteria there and to be able to digest things properly. And this all goes back to, even when we're born as infants, now, lactobacillus is the major good bacteria that would be there. And guess what feeds that major bacteria when we're infants? The mother's milk. But if the mother's milk has the glyphosate chelating the manganese, the lactobacillus can't live without enough manganese. And now we know that we're deficient in manganese when they're tested. Autistic kids are typically deficient, or the ones that were tested were deficient in manganese. And we start to see the connection between autism and these mineral deficiencies, and the autistic kids typically suffer from more gut issues. And so it's this big circle that leads back to what we're putting in our bodies. So this is another reason that I thought this was important enough for a 4-part series, that omega-6s, go back and watch section 1, but can be pro-inflammatory when they're from these seed oils. And then we certainly know why, because they're genetically modified, and now they're sprayed with glyphosate, which is a chelator, so it chelates minerals in the plants and in us when we eat them. So we just need to think this through. We need to think, is the advice we're being given what we really should do, or should we really research and look at the choices we make? So I hope this wasn't too complicated. Just make sure you know it can be tied to the chronic diseases we see today. It can be tied to fatigue, and I didn't write them all, like I say. I mean, we could go on and on. But we need to know that this is a factor. This stuff is we're spraying more and more year after year after year after year. We're having more genetically modified crops. And unfortunately, then in many cases, we're being told this is the healthy oils and things we need to eat and cook with. And so let's educate ourselves. Let's make good decisions. Please like this. Please share it. Please subscribe on YouTube. Please, you have to know people who can benefit from this. So please share it and help other people gain knowledge so that we can help them obtain optimal health and wellness along with yourself. So I'll see you next time. We'll get part 4, the conclusion of all this truth about fat. Thanks. Really, the reason they make these GMOs is convenience, right? They want to make it more convenient to produce more food. And they do that at a cost to our health, even though they can typically grow these crops cheaper that way. So let's talk about it.